Today we're going to be looking at the Nano V2, an ultra compact from Mountain Buggy. This is actually the first Mountain Buggy stroller that we've looked at in a long time on this channel. My general attitude towards Mountain Buggy design is, unfortunately, that it's been in decline for several years at this point. Early Mountain Buggy models were amazing for their rugged simplicity, really unparalleled by other makers of three-wheeled terrain models around 10 years ago or so. In fact, they were so good that we still see those early models on a more or less frequent basis, even though they've probably gone through 5 or 6 kids by now. But shortly after the brand went bankrupt and was acquired by Phil and Ted's, their design philosophy seemed to change for the worse, sacrificing simple sturdiness for weaker and more complex mechanisms that keep key points on their chassis. Over the years, their inability to bounce back has more or less completely removed them from the map, at least here in Norway. The Nano has caught our eye as worthy of revisiting the brand though, firstly because of the sheer number of requests that we've received to cover it, but more importantly because of its price. The Nano is cheap, clocking in at less than half the price of a Baby Zen Yo-Yo Plus, while seeming to deliver a relatively premium product. Let's start off with some stats. The Nano clocks in at 5.9 kilos and folds down to 51 by 30 by 46 centimeters, though these dimensions are with the wheels removed, and thus are the smallest that one can make the stroller. I usually don't give the folded dimensions with the wheels removed, but it's important in this case, as it's the only way to get the Nano small enough to fit as carry-on luggage on some, though definitely not all, airlines. With relation to weight capacity, the Nano takes up to 20 kilos in the seat and 5 kilos in the underslung shopping basket. The basket's capacity is more or less average, while the seat's capacity is a little bit more than usual. And what's extra nice about the Nano seat is that it's also larger than most ultra compacts, both in terms of the length of the seat back as well as the space between the seat and the footrest, allowing it to accommodate children up to at least 3.5 or so, which is when most people stop using strollers altogether. The Nano doesn't have a full recline, but then I wouldn't recommend using it before 6 months anyway. I don't recommend using ultra compacts for newborns generally, due to weak overall chassis construction and severely limited terrain capability, which leads to a lot of shocks and jolts. If you are thinking about using it for newborns though, then it is possible to use a carry-cot cocoon with the Nano, as well as a car seat. But note that the method for attaching the car seat involves straps as opposed to plastic adapters, and thus is a little more work to set up than on other models. We'll be doing a video later showing how this is done. The Nano seat also has an adjustable leg rest, which is very nice, and the canopy gives acceptable sun coverage. It's not oversized, but it's acceptable. As far as your own comfort is concerned, the Nano is relatively easy to fold, not incorporating a lot of activation mechanisms, but it does include a few extra steps to secure it properly once it is folded down. Most notably a strap to keep the handle and canopy section from flopping out, which I suspect might wind up being annoying for a lot of people. Also note again that while the Nano is easy enough to fold for daily use, packing it down as small as possible to use as airline luggage does involve the extra steps of removing the wheels and folding in the rear wheel housing on both sides, and even when this is done, the dimensions are still a tad too large to fit on a lot of airlines. So you should check your airline's requirements ahead of time if you're planning on taking it on as carry-on luggage. Once it is folded down securely, the Nano sports both a handle and a shoulder strap for easy carrying, and also includes a travel bag in the package. This is, by the way, the only bit of extra kit included though, so you will have to get the rain cover separately. I'd like to make a few additional notes on comfort and functionality before we move on to the mechanics. Despite having a decent weight capacity, the shopping basket is a little harder to access than on much of the competition due to the folding leg rest in the front and the position of one of the support bars in the back. As far as maintenance is concerned, the fabrics are not that hard to remove from the chassis, but the backboard is unfortunately not removable and is too large to fit in most washing machines, meaning that you'll need to wash the fabrics by hand. With regards to the rest of the chassis, Mountain Buggy has taken a few measures to simplify maintenance, such as including adjustable screws on the brake cable and using screws instead of rivets at a few points across the chassis, which allow for tightening and realignment. But the overall construction does involve quite a few support bars and articulation points that are in most cases riveted, which means that down the line, the Nano may get a bit loose and rickety, requiring drilling and re-riveting to get it tight again. We'll cover this a bit more when we go over the mechanics. When it comes to drivability, the Nano has no real suspension and average 6-inch wheels, so much like most of the rest of the ultra-compact world, it will really only drive well on smooth terrain, inside the airport or in shopping malls, or on smooth paved streets and so on. Okay, let's move on and look at the mechanics of the Nano, top to bottom. Okay, we're going to start by talking about the folding mechanism. So the way the folding mechanism works on this model, you flip back the canopy and you push these 2 buttons here on the inside of the handle, and then when that top part of the handle folds in enough, it actually activates the second fold, like this, and then the whole chassis folds together. So there's a couple things about this. One thing is that when it's working as it should be, it's quite an easy stroller to fold down. Again, with the extra fact that you actually have to use a strap once it's folded down to keep this part from falling away from the rest of the chassis. So there is a little bit of extra work in order to secure it at the bottom, but overall it's quite an easy way of folding the stroller. Mechanically though, there are a few worrying features on this stroller. First off, there is simply the way that those two activation mechanisms work. This means that you have internal wires and plastic parts inside both of these mechanisms that are causing these mechanisms to activate and the stroller to fold against each other. So it's a relatively complicated internal system, and at these points it is actually riveted, so if anything goes wrong you will have to drill out the rivets. What I would see as going wrong eventually is that if, for example, you get a lot of dirt, or if the mechanisms start to become misaligned a bit and it pulls too hard on that wire, the wires will most likely snap. With a lot of mountain buggy models, they have a tendency to use really, really thin wires for this sort of a mechanical setup. So that's one thing, that there is relatively fragile mechanisms inside that are pretty complex in order to activate that folding system. The second thing that's a little bit worrisome about the folding system overall is simply the sheer number of support bars that cross across the entire structure. Some of these are put together with screws, but the majority of them are rivets. And all of these points are points that will loosen over time. And once they start to loosen, you're going to have like rickety motion at all of those points, ricketiness and looseness. And that also contributes to the potential for doing damage to those internal complex mechanisms, because it can add to like asymmetry. So it'll start to fold on one side, like you'll push down the handle, start to fold on one side, but because of the asymmetry of the looseness, it won't quite succeed in activating the mechanism on the other side, and then you might rip that internal wire. So, I don't know, that's just hypothetical, but I do see both of those in combination as causing potential problems with the Nano down the road in relation to the overall sturdiness of the chassis, as well as actual breaks that can occur with the folding mechanism. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of a closer look at the lower back end. First off, I'd point out that there is no suspension, as I already mentioned. A lot of ultra-compact strollers don't have suspension, so I suppose that's okay. Just means that you're relegated towards driving in smoother terrain. This here is not actually suspension. This is the like folding inwards setup on these rear housings, which allows you to save the precious few centimeters, so that when you fold down the whole stroller, you can get it inside the travel bag and hopefully get it into hand luggage, even though again, it doesn't follow exactly the guidelines for like the majority of airlines, but it's pretty close for a lot of them. I kind of feel that it's a little bit of a missed opportunity not to have put a spring in here and have done suspension here. I mean, obviously they were more interested in getting that fold right, but still a little bit of a missed opportunity, and it's actually a mechanism that worries me a little bit, because this is just run with a rivet straight through that runs down a channel on the backside of this wheel. When that rivet begins to loosen, what's going to wind up happening is that when you lift up the stroller in the back, this hinge will wind up being loose, won't be this tight folding setup anymore. It's only that rivet that's really holding it tight in one position or the other. So that's an area that will most likely loosen. Another area that I suspect will be a problem will be this crossbar here. This crossbar is made of very thin metal, has like that classic 2 rivet setup that I've seen on a wide variety of strollers over the years. This would be one of those points I would suspect will wind up taking quite a lot of pressure. Those rivets could loosen and this bar could break. Okay, looking at the brake system then, it has like this on-off brake system on one side with a wire that runs through. It is actually relatively complicated. One thing I do like about it is that a lot of ultra-compact manufacturers that use the brake wire don't put adjustment screws, and Mountain Buggy actually has put adjustment screws on both sides of this brake wire. So over time, as the dimensions of the internal wire change in relation to the outer wire, that just happens when you get like rust and dust, and it kind of like activating those brakes puts pressure on the outer rubber housing. You can adjust for that over time so that the brakes still actually function as they should, and you don't wind up with like one side where the brake pin is sticking slightly out and rattling on the wheels you go. So brake wire systems are not my favorite sort of brake systems in general, but I do like that they put in a little bit of effort towards being able to maintain it over time. Okay, having a little bit of a closer look at the front end then. It has the 6-inch wheels in the front again. There is again no suspension here either, so there's really no suspension on the entirety of the stroller. They have done this setup where you have a fork that is like, I guess for style purposes, just has one side that goes down and then the axle goes through the wheel. It's not particularly bad. If this were a larger stroller, that would actually aid in snow being able to, snow or sand or like that sort of terrain being able to fall out one side. But of course, you're not going to take this on any snow or any sort of terrain, so you kind of lose that effect. The one thing though is that over time, I would say that with weight, you're going to wind up sort of asymmetrically affecting the ball bearings inside this wheel, because the weight's going to push down like this, right? And so that ball bearing is going to lift up a bit, and it's going to put extra pressure on one side, like the lower side there, the higher side here, which could wind up leading to those wheels loosening a little bit faster than they might on a regular sort of a fork where you have two walls. But I don't anticipate that being like a major problem. Only time will tell, whether that will actually be a problem. The wheels don't have any sort of wobble protection inside. That could be a more serious problem. They are removable, and you'll see that on the axle itself, there is really only the one point at which the wheel axle is going to be held up inside the housing. There's no sort of suspension pads or anything like that. It doesn't have an extra lip or a difference in circumference at the bottom. What this means then is that over time, that axle has a potential to put pressure vertically to the sides of the tunnel in which it sticks into, and it could loosen this up a bit. And what that leads to is that when you wind up going fast with the stroller, the front wheels have a tendency to wobble. Again, only time will tell on that, but I have seen that problem in a lot of situations with strollers before. The swivel lock itself runs on the side here. Just this peg slides down into the wheel. Very common system, not particularly a bad system, and they have actually used a metal peg on the inside running down into the trough, so that's like a little bit better than if they just done plastic in any case. So, should you get the Mountain Buggy Nano? I would say it's really a question of budget. My guess with the Nano is that the key element that people will love is the large and adjustable seat, but that after a few years, the trade-off will probably be a somewhat loose and rickety chassis if there aren't outright problems with one or another of its complicated and fragile mechanisms. That being said though, with the caveat of needing to check airline luggage requirements before using it as carry-on luggage, the Nano is definitely the best ultra-compact model we've seen for this price, and is a worthy substitute to the better and pricier premium models if you just need an ultra-compact as a limited-use vacation stroller that will last through your entire period of stroller use. In any case, we hope you found this video interesting, and if you did, we ask that you subscribe, as it helps us to continue making videos in the future. Thank you.